Welcome, everybody, to Soccer 101. My name is Taylor Rockwell, and today we're going somewhere that is easy to overlook as a footballing nation, but has had a massive influence on world football throughout the years. It's Austria, a place, and I say this without trying to be overtly critical, because I am one of them, that 3 out of 4 Americans could probably not point to on a map. Austria is a confusing one. This week, we're spending some time with the Austrian top flight. How long has it existed? What does it look like today? How did a competition that once helped shape modern football end up as one of Europe's great talent laboratories? We'll run through the league's winding history, its constantly evolving format, the big clubs and dynasties of the past, and why one team now towers over the rest. Graham Ruthven, are you excited to get into all things Austria? Or like view behind the curtain, a nation we've been planning to discuss for like a month and a half now.
Yeah, I am more than ready to talk about the other Bundesliga, which is actually the title of an Austrian football podcast that I've dipped into once or twice over the year. I've always enjoyed that as a podcast title. Yeah, we planned on doing this, I think, before Christmas. And then I think one of us was ill, or both of us was ill, or it just didn't happen.
I think there was one day where we were like, "It's Christmas break period."
Yeah,
New Year. All right, and here we are. So Graham has his suit on. He's ready to head to a Viennese coffee house to discuss tactical philosophy. With that in mind, Graham, you are a noted soccer sicko. What was your familiarity with the league, with some of the clubs prior to this episode?
Didn't have a huge exposure, to be honest. Obviously, some names of clubs like Red Bull Salzburg, we've obviously got an exposure to them through the Champions League, some of the Vienna clubs as well. But it's not a league that is really on my radar. Like I've written a couple times about it for the newsletter, that occasionally you'll hear about players, like talented players coming through the Austrian pipeline, which is obviously quite prolific. A certain Erling Haaland, of course, coming through at Red Bull Salzburg a few years ago. And so occasionally I will dip into the Austrian Bundesliga then. But no, I didn't have a very deep knowledge. And to be honest, it sounds like you've got a deeper knowledge of the kind of tactical origins and influence of Austria. It sounds like you've really gone in on that, which genuinely very interested to hear about. I mean, kind of maybe stayed away from that.
I think I got 3/4 of the way through, maybe 2/3 of the way through Inverting the Pyramid, and then I read about it in The Ball is Round, which is one of my favorite footballing history books that's ever been written. I did not brush up on that largely because I cannot find my copy of The Ball is Round, but that book does a really good job of like speaking to the history and importance of Austrian football and the like intellectualism of Austrian football, specifically the idea of sitting around and talking about tactics and philosophy and style, and not just having it be like, well, this is what you do and this is how it's played. It seems like Austria was a very central point in debate and discussion and discourse, and the idea that there can be philosophy to this game, not just brute force.
And one of the reasons that I am familiar with that, Taylor, is I was reading an article fairly recently on Ralf Rangnick and how they've taken him to, he's the Austrian national team manager and has been for the last 2 or 3 years. They've taken him to their hearts more than like Manchester United did, where they were like, "What are you talking about, nerd?" Exactly. Ralf Rangnick, as in Austrian football, like they're very much up for talk about philosophy and tactical identity, and that's kind of like his whole thing. So that's been a good fit for them.
And so we look at the history of the sport in the country, not surprisingly, arrives via British expats in the 19th century. You have clubs like Rapid Vienna, Austria Vienna, and First Vienna FC emerging early on. And in 1924, Austria becomes one of the first countries in continental Europe to adopt professional leagues, a professional system, launching a fully professional league at that point. And so you see them at the forefront of professionalism, of modernizing the sport, and adding a bit of, I don't know, philosophy and style to the British approach to football at the point.
Yeah, it seems to be a pretty fascinating period in the history of soccer in the country. You have a very Vienna-centric kind of soccer sphere for a long time, up until the creation of the National League in 1924, which I found interesting. Various cup competitions, and then they tried to bring together like an organised league called the Austrian First Class in 1911, kind of collapsed, and then they brought back the kind of proper league, the National Liga, in 1937, fast forwarding a little bit from 1924. And then they had this little thing you might have heard about called the Second World War. And Austria was annexed by, obviously, Nazi Germany, and that brought an end to the Austrian League, and a number of Austrian clubs played in the Nazi Germany League at that time, which is unfortunate. So it wasn't until 1945 that Austria had its own league again. But the Austrian Bundesliga, which is the current league structure, the current name of the league, it didn't actually start until 1974, and that's when they unified like a number of splinter leagues that had created post-war in Austria. And that's when there was a real focus on professionalism and particularly commercialism. That's kind of when the growth of the Austrian Bundesliga can be tracked. And in 1991, the Austrian Bundesliga split from the National Association, much like the Premier League did. I find that interesting because there's a union between the Bundesliga and the National Association in Germany. So obviously a lot of overlap between Austrian and German football, as kind of exemplified by the name of the league, but they decided they wanted to go in a different direction. They kind of followed the Premier League model, and so they're two different organisations, and that brings us up to the present day.
It does, and now I'm going to take us back to the 1930s, as is my brand, because I did want to pause for a moment to spotlight the Wunder team of the early 1930s, the Austrian national team, that certainly helps like develop the domestic league, but it also becomes a leading national team that others tend to follow and take note of, and that national team features innovations like short passing and player movement. Again, we're talking early on in the sport, or relatively early on, and it kind of creates this idea that, like, well, what else can we play with? What else can we toy around with? And so there is a lot of thought put into it and discussion around style of Austrian football. And then, as you said, World War II and the Anschluss, the Nazi annexation, really ends that one. And you have like a lot of those thinkers were Jewish. You have Jewish officials and players forced out and not allowed to play anymore, and then worse to follow. But it really does kind of knock Austrian football off for, I think, a really long time. And I think it takes a really long time for them to reestablish, as you kind of outline with the history. And it isn't until the 70s, when you have the formation of that Bundesliga, that there is a bit more strength, specifically outside of Vienna. You have more regional teams or provincial teams like starting to play, starting to professionalize, starting to find success. But because of that, not just World War II, but not just because of World War II, but you do have the Austrian League already at that point not being quite as prominent. And I think that leads to less commercialization, less money flowing in. And so it does seem like a nation that was leading like football development at one point becomes not quite a backwater, but it's certainly not where it was decades before that.
Yeah.
And I kind of would say that's where it still is to this day.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, it's a similar trajectory to Hungary, right? Like Hungary had a similar growth period, maybe slightly later than Austria. Like theirs led into the 50s, where obviously you have that great Hungary team that thumps England. But yeah, they've kind of, unfortunately for them, become a bit of a backwater since then.
Until along comes Red Bull, right? That's the other kind of turning point in this, or like key point in this one. In 2005, Red Bull takes over SV Austria Salzburg, turns them into Red Bull Salzburg, and now they introduce corporate funding, youth development, modern sports science and analytics, and that is when the league becomes fully dominated by RB Salzburg, who, not surprisingly, are also still very much export-oriented, develop players, sell them on. Erling Haaland, a prime example of that. You can make the money, you reinvest it, and you grow from there.
Yeah, it got to a point in that 10 titles in a row streak that they had, which is the longest in Austrian league history, just got to a point where it was difficult to envisage anyone breaking their stranglehold because of their place in the Red Bull pipeline, right, where anyone of real talent would start at Red Bull Salzburg. So they weren't getting the finished product. They were going to Leipzig and then ultimately being sold on, like Erling Haaland. Of course, he goes to Dortmund rather than Leipzig, but nonetheless, the same principle. So they had Erling Haaland, they had Dominik Szoboszlai, Naby Keita, Benjamin Sesko, Karim Adeyemi, Konrad Laimer, Sadio Mane, Dio Upamecano. Like, it is a long list. That's just a few. Like, it's a list of like 30 to 40 players that listeners will have heard of and have gone on to bigger and better things. The reason they did falter a couple of seasons ago, so they've not won the title for a couple of years. Sturm Graz have won the title. The reason they faltered is because the Red Bull model faltered for a few years, and there wasn't the same level of talent being sent there. So you look at RB Leipzig, and you can correlate their lack of success in the last couple of years to the lack of success that Red Bull Salzburg have had. But yes, absolutely fair to say that in modern times they have been the dominant force. In terms of like historic titles, Rapid Vienna are the
Yep.
most successful club in Austrian soccer history. They've won the title 32 times. Then you have Austria Vienna on 24.
Only 2 since 97, I want to say.
Yeah.
So, like, yes,
That
very
tells you a lot.
successful. Slightly less so more recently.
Absolutely. Austria Vienna, I think, are a similar story for them. They've got 24. Then you've got Salzburg on 17. Then you've got, I'm looking through the list here, Sturm Graz. They've got 5 titles in their history, including the recent ones. Tirol Innsbruck have won it a good few times, as recently as 2002. They actually went bust and disappeared as a club. It's not often you find a club in the 21st century in like quite a developed league that no longer exists. But Tirol Innsbruck, unfortunately, they disappeared.
So if someone is asking you, Graham, like, what is, like, give me the 30-second pitch on the Austrian Bundesliga. Is it essentially like very old league with lots of importance to modern football, but less so more recently, and instead more of a developmental and selling league at this point? Is that about the summary?
Come and see the stars of tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, it certainly used to be the pitch when Red Bull were cranking them out. I mean, even Sturm Graz, like, maybe not quite to the Erling Haaland levels, but Mika Biereth, who's now at Monaco and who went on that incredible scoring run last season, he was plucked from Sturm Graz. There was actually a Scottish player at Sturm Graz when they won the title, Max Johnson. He's now gone to the Championship for relatively big money. So I think everyone's looked at what Red Bull Salzburg have been doing. I'm not saying the Sturm Graz are doing it to the same level, but yeah, there's a common idea in the Austrian Bundesliga that that's not going to be the culmination of players' careers. They want talented players to come there, get game time, and then frequently move to the German Bundesliga, where obviously there's like cultural overlap between the two countries. That seems to be the model for a lot of these clubs.
So where would you put it in terms of strength of the league then? Is it getting better? Is it staying as it has been? Is it getting worse?
So as always, Opta's team rankings were my first protocol here, and because we did Norway last time, Taylor. According to my notes here, that was so long ago you could tell me it was anything. But I plugged in the Elite Serien, which is the Norwegian league. Opta believes Salzburg would be the highest ranked Austrian team, but they would only be 4th in the Norwegian league behind Bodo Glimt, Viking, and Brann. So not stronger than the Norwegian league, as I say, bring that up because we did it recently. I then plugged in MLS, which I always do as well. Salzburg would be only the 12th best team in MLS according to Opta, which is interesting. And then looking at the UEFA coefficient, not a very rosy picture for Austria right now. So this, for anyone who doesn't know, this is a UEFA ranking of the leagues within that confederation. Austria ranks only 17th at the moment. So that puts them below Cyprus, Czechia, and Poland, none of which you would consider. Poland's always a confusing one, right? Why do they not have a better league? But anyway, it's never been a very strong league. Yeah, and that has dropped from being 13th last season and 10th a couple seasons before that. So in 2 or 3 seasons, there's always a bit of a lag with these things, but in 2 or 3 seasons, they've gone from 10th to 17th. So UEFA believes that the league is getting worse in terms of the quality. And anecdotally, that kind of lines up, because do you remember when Salzburg would actually like make an impact on and look, I don't want to attach too much value on just like a single team, but nonetheless Salzburg would make like runs in the Champions League, and I remember a game against Liverpool a few seasons ago under Jesse Marsch, I think, where they really gave Liverpool a go. And Sturm Graz, the current champions, are just not really making that sort of impact. So if they're the best team in Austria, then yeah, maybe the quality has dropped a little bit.
I think it has. I think it's fair to say that, but I think also viewed through the lens of it being a developmental stepping stone league, that's not even a criticism. That's not even a negative thing necessarily. I think it's more of a it is what it is sort of situation. And you look at the national team, the current national team for Austria, I think like 2 of the 4 goalkeepers from their most recent squad play in the domestic league. Aside from that, it is like a person who's over 30 and then a 20-year-old. So right there, it's sort of the like players who come back maybe to play, and then players who are just breaking through. The majority of their squad are playing for bigger, better leagues around Europe, or have played there in the case of Marko Arnautovic. And so that feels to me pretty representative of the league itself, that you have players who get their start there, come through as youngsters and teenagers into maybe late teens, early 20s. Then they start getting those moves either to the Bundesliga or maybe like a slight step up and then the bigger move thereafter. So the league's still very important for the national team, just less as a like competitive breeding ground for the current team and more so like setting the stage for teams to come.
Yeah, and that means when you look through historic figures, like who are the best ever Austrian Bundesliga players, you're not getting many household names in that list. So Hans Kranke is the league's all-time top scorer.
Stan's brother?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I think one of his brothers actually does, or is his son, right, that owns Arsenal? So maybe Hans Kranke owns someone else. But yeah, actually won the European Golden Boot. So I guess wasn't a nobody at the time. But frankly, I haven't heard of Hans Kranke. Ivica Vastic played until 2019. Bit of an icon in the league as well. Played for no fewer than 6 different Austrian clubs. But these are players who, to be blunt, were seen as not up to the level to go on to other leagues, and so that's how they ended up staying in the Austrian Bundesliga for so long. And if you look at the list of current star players, Elias Havel is the top scorer right now. He's at Hartberg on loan from Lask. He's been linked with a number of different clubs. Peter Ratkov, is up there as well. He's got 9 goals for Salzburg. Young player, will be moving on at some point, you'd imagine. Mads Bidstrup is one of the best midfielders in the league. Also plays for Salzburg. You've got this is a tricky one to pronounce, apologies. Otar Kitashvili, I think. He's at Sturm Graz, attacking midfield position. But all of these players...
Georgian?
I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, it sounds Georgian, doesn't it? But yeah, I think all these players are ideally looking to use these clubs as springboards, and to be honest, that's a smart strategy. Like, I wish Scottish football would do that more often and position themselves in that way. I think Celtic have done it in the past, not doing it so much now. But yeah, Austrian clubs, I think, are very much plugged into a lot of the ways of modern football in terms of cutting edge recruitment. One of the things that has maybe pulled them back in recent years, as I was reading, basically Salzburg in particular were ahead of the curve in terms of like signing players from Africa and Asia in particular, and now a lot of other leagues are like caught up in that sense. We see Brighton doing that a lot, going to obscure markets in South America as well. So it feels like some of the Austrian clubs have lost their advantage in that sense.
How do you think this sets them up for the World Cup to come, Austria? They're a team that at various points has been labeled a dark horse, and at times has gotten even like the Morocco treatment of dark horse into like, are they now a favorite? I'm not quite sure where they fit. And I think that's probably still where they are for me. I don't know if they can like, they're going to like sneak up on anybody, because I think people now know they are a solid, if like not fully remarkable or unremarkable team or whatever. Like, they're not elite, they're not bad, they're somewhere in between, but they're going to have names that people know, and they're going to be a difficult team, I think. That is kind of my understanding of the Austrian national team, is they do have some big difference makers, but they have a lot of people who maybe you've heard like their name, or you've like, oh yeah, he plays for Napoli maybe, or is he with Frankfurt now? I forget. But at the same time, all of those guys are very good and have a lot of reps in some of the best leagues for some of the biggest teams.
Yeah, I expect they'll be competitive at the World Cup this summer. They've got a lot of guys. I think you're absolutely spot on, Taylor. Like, a lot of players who are maybe not star names, but I think they are proof of how deep like European international soccer is, because they're pretty much all of a high level. They were certainly competitive at the last Euros, obviously qualified top of their group for this World Cup, and I think under Ralf Rangnick, they've become really proactive, really dynamic, really modern. I think every player knows their role in that team. And so I think that's going to make them difficult opponents at the World Cup. They're in a group with Argentina, Algeria and Jordan. So I think they would expect to get out of that group in second place, frankly. But obviously there's the fallback of some third place teams going through as well. So I think there's a very good chance that they'll make a run into the knockout stages. In terms of the league's influence in that squad, the squad, the national team squad, is a mix of players who, I've started out at academy teams in Austria before moving on. And also you've got a lot of players who have been at German clubs from a very young age, who maybe haven't, even played in Austrian football, because obviously the overlap between the two countries. But for the last 2 World Cup qualifiers, Rangnick called up just 2 domestic-based outfield players. So there was Alessandro Schopp from Wolfsberger and Nicholas Wurmbrand from Rapid Vienna. Every other player, apart from the 2 sub-goalkeepers that you mentioned, played in foreign leagues. 14 from the German Bundesliga. So this is a squad of players, a group of players that have a high level of technical ability and experience in good leagues.
Yeah, and I think it was Wurmbrand is the 20-year-old, and then Schopf is the plus 30-year-old, which again feels on brand. But it is like you can click on basically any player in the squad if you go to their Wikipedia page, and you will see, like, you're right, some lived in Germany, have only played in Germany, but more often than not, you're getting Salzburg, or you are getting like Rapid Vienna or something along those lines. Like you'll get, at least at some point at youth level, or maybe they transitioned into being a professional, there is going to be some involvement with the Austrian league. So it's an important league for the national team and for the country. It is not one of the best that we've discussed on this show, but I'm struggling with it because I don't want to do it a disservice, and I don't want to be dismissive of it, because I think it's a very important league historically, but also sort of serves as a model of being a selling league, essentially, in the modern era, and I think has found ways to make that work really successfully while having a national team that does seem to be improving, generally speaking, year on year from at least when I was a kid.
Yeah, if you're a non-Big Five league, this is the model. Like, you have historically significant clubs with deep community roots, with decent attendances, by the way. Like, we're talking about an average of 8,500 per game. There was a Vienna derby in September of this season, and that attendance was 26,000. So, decent interest in these leagues. Interestingly, I was also looking at the academy scene in Austria and how much of an emphasis they put on that youth development that you were kind of referencing there, Taylor, with how many of the national team have started out at these clubs. And some of these clubs get like 1,000 fans for their like academy games, which I think just tells you how much, not just how much the clubs and these front offices and managers are bought into this model, but how much the fans are bought into this model, where they take pride in not just the players who are playing for the club, but the players that their clubs are producing as well, and going on to maybe bigger and better things in the Bundesliga, in the German Bundesliga or other leagues. So yeah, they've got that sort of that base of community and interest and history, but then they've got this model that, you know, serves them well and means that even if it's only for a fleeting period, there is talent passing through these clubs. And as I say, like, sign me up for this for the Scottish Premiership. This seems like a pretty good combination to have.
Sign me up for this for the Scottish Premier League. A good note to end on from Graham Ruthven. Austria, I hope we did you proud. I would be nervous for the U.S. to meet them at the World Cup. They feel like a team that would be easy to think like, we can find a way through them and we can have more of the ball. And similar to Switzerland, I feel like Austria can punish you if you get complacent or fail to properly rate them. So I look forward to them at the World Cup. I'm excited to see them and some of their difference makers. I have a strange soft spot for David Alaba. I don't know why I like him so much, but I do. I think it's because he was like a winger at one point and then became a fullback and is now a center back.
Because he's like the Austrian Wes McKennie, like just can do everything. Yeah,
and seems to be good vibes as well. Seems to be enjoyed by whichever manager he represents, even if he hasn't done a ton of representing for Real Madrid in seasons past.
I would also be nervous about the US, or Scotland, I guess, playing Austria at the World Cup, but I haven't done any time people try and plot the knockout rounds of this World Cup, I'm like, nope, just tell me when the groups are done, who is playing each other. It's always impossible.
Thing. That's the thing that, like, I more than anything that I loathe about this format and the expansion is just that now you have third place teams going through, which could be good because, you know, you get more teams alive, and that means maybe we don't lose a big team that can entertain, but we also get some smaller teams in there as well. But it just makes things so complicated to plot, and it just makes it feel like those group stage games aren't going to matter as much. To your point, it's like, I think they'll finish second, which used to matter, but now even if they don't and they get a win and they're in third, they're in strong position. So, yay the 2026 World Cup, but hooray Austria. How about that?
Yeah. It's strange. It's like Nations League vibes. That's my approach to the European Nations League, is like, just when it's over, just tell us who we're playing next, and we'll deal with that.
Perfect. That's a good note to end on. Graham Ruthven, thank you for preparing to talk Austria with me for about a month, and then doing so today.
Thank you, Taylor Rockwell.
Listeners, thank you all so much for listening. We very much appreciate it. We always enjoy getting to talk about these nations as we build towards the World Cup. We are going to be doing our lengthy previews over at the Total Soccer Show ahead of the World Cup. We're already nervous about it. So we're going to go start our research now, and we'll talk to you next week.